Class of 2020, welcome to Vassar. My name is Jody Schwartz, and I'm a biology professor here at Vassar. I love being a scientist, but I want you to know that I came to science in a very roundabout way. I was actually a history major in college, and I avoided science for most of my life, up until I was 21 years old. It wasn't until I accidentally attended an ocean sciences program in my junior year at Oberlin College that I came to see science as a creative, collaborative, and exciting approach to learning about my world. And I've been hooked ever since. So I hope those of you who love science and those of you who avoid science all find something in my thoughts that appeal to you. I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you for a few minutes about the freshman book. The book, The Wild Life of Our Bodies by Rob Dunn, aims to challenge our very notions of who we are, right down to our essential biological building blocks, our genes, our parasites, our predators. Right from the get-go, this book makes us uncomfortable by suggesting that the very things that we know make us sick, such as parasitic worms, may actually be key to actually helping us be well. As a biologist, I love ideas that challenge what we think we know, and in fact, this is what excited me about science in the first place. What I appreciate about this book is that it helps us think about evolution in ways that are different than the way we typically think about it, by focusing on the interaction between species. So let's start with that. Here I'm showing you an image of something that should look pretty familiar to most of you. It's Nemo. Nemo living in and with its anemone. Clownfish represent a symbiotic relationship with sea anemones. And so this introduces a concept that I'd like you to think about for a few minutes, and that is the concept of symbiosis. Symbiosis literally means living together, and in biology it means the living together of dissimilar organisms. So Nemo, a fish, and sea anemones, which are a marine invertebrate, represent the living together of dissimilar organisms. And in this particular symbiosis, both partners benefit. It turns out that Nemo, by living in the sea anemone, is able to evade predators and has protection. And the anemone benefits because Nemo actually releases nutrients that the sea anemone uses for its own nutrition. Now I'm going to show you a different example of symbiosis, or the living together of dissimilar organisms. Here we have a human-parasite interaction. This is an image from the CDC showing you the life cycle of hookworms, which is actually one of the examples that Rob Dunn uses in his book to illustrate some of the non-conventional ideas about how humans interact with nature. In this image, it's showing you the life cycle of hookworm, including the stage that it lives inside humans. And in this interaction, what we've been taught our entire lives is that when parasites and microbes enter our bodies, the interaction is harmful to humans. So this is an example of symbiosis where one partner benefits and the other is harmed. Of course, Rob Dunn challenges us to reconsider that idea by considering that hookworms, which are parasitic and do cause human disease, may also have another role, and that is to help shape our immune system in ways that actually benefit us. So we're seeing through Rob Dunn's book that things that we hold near and dear to our heart, including our ideas of what parasites and pathogens are, maybe aren't quite as clear-cut or as simple as we think. Now I'm showing you a third and final image of a symbiotic relationship, and this is the symbiotic relationship that we ourselves have with our microbiome. That means the thousands of species of microbes that live in and on our body. And of course, given the prelude that just led up to this, you might expect that, in fact, these microbes living in and on our body can have a range of interactions with us, ranging from beneficial to us to harmful. So biology is, in fact, complex. Now I want to turn our attention to a slightly different topic, and that is the topic of evolution, because ultimately what I'd like to do is have you think about symbiosis in the context of evolution. What we're showing here is a image, an illustration from one of Darwin's notebooks. This is from the mid 1800s. And in this image, Darwin is illustrating some concepts that he developed through many, many years of observing the natural world. And what I love about this image is, first of all, it starts with the words "I think." And this is fundamentally how science operates. It starts with things that we think and then proceeds to ways of testing those ideas of what we think. But in this tree, what Darwin is showing is a series of relationships among organisms. So let's dissect this tree. What this tree is showing is species A, B, C, and D, and these are species that exist on the Earth right now that Darwin observed. And he's hypothesizing how these species might be related to each other. And so in his conception, the species that exist alongside other branches and other tips of the tree that represent species that no longer exist. In fact, they've gone extinct. And all of these species, both the ones that still exist and the ones that have gone extinct, all arose from a common ancestor, shown here as number 1. So whatever this species or population was, number 1, gave rise to other species and populations that then diverged from each other and went on their own independent paths, their own independent evolutionary paths, ultimately leading to a collection of species, some of which still exist and some of which do not. And so what Darwin articulated from this are some key ideas that we now know to be absolutely true about evolution. One is the idea of descent with modification. From this original ancestor 1, we have descendants or offspring that are slightly different from each other. So each of them represents a different lineage. And then each one of these can then diverge. Okay, so from a single ancestor, we get variable descendants, and each of those descendants leaves variable descendants. And then the next idea is the idea of natural selection, in which each one of these lineages that originally arose from a common ancestor but is variable and different from the others undergoes its own series of events. Each one of these lineages is engaged in the process of interacting with its environment, interacting with other organisms, and those that have traits that fundamentally support their own growth and reproduction are going to be the ones that continue to leave offspring. Okay, so descent with modification produces a variety of individuals that are all slightly different from each other. And then these individuals all are operating in the natural environment. They are facing predators, they're facing parasites, they're interacting with organisms, they're trying to feed themselves. And if organisms have particular traits that help them game the system, as it were, so that they're able to acquire more food or evade predators more readily, or otherwise improve their chances of reproducing and leaving offspring, the result is that those variant traits are going to be more highly represented in the population than traits that are less adaptive. And so this represents one of the key ideas of evolution, that the variability in existing individuals and populations ultimately allows organisms to adapt to the environments that they live in. But of course, this process of adaptation can only work on variation that actually exists in the population. You cannot have adaptation if you don't actually have the trait already existing in the population. So one of the misconceptions about evolution is that that adaptation can somehow foresee the future and then work in that direction, trying to move toward the future. And that's actually a misconception. Evolution really only operates on the variation that does exist, and then if traits happen to be better adapted than others, they might end up being selected and propagated through the population. Okay, so here's where I want to bring it back to symbiosis now. I just talked about how if in the natural environment an organism has traits that allow it to better acquire food or evade predators or whatever, then it is more likely to leave more offspring and therefore propagate its trait. Well, and I also talked about how evolution can only act on existing variation. So here is something that organisms have figured out that is really amazing is what if your existing variation in your population and your species actually isn't really sufficient? One strategy that you could use is to partner up with other organisms and leverage their traits for your own benefit. And so fundamentally, that is where many mutually beneficial symbioses arose from, is the need or the ability to acquire traits from completely other organisms or species. What I'm showing here is an example of a coral reef. Corals are animals, but they have intracellular plant-like organisms that live inside their cells and produce food for them. And in return, the corals provide nutrients to their symbiotic partners. By partnering together, both of the species involved in this symbiosis are able to live in habitats that they couldn't live in otherwise. So here is an example of something that is an adaptation, but it's an adaptation by co-opting traits from other partners. The corals have co-opted photosynthesis, and the algae or the plant-like organism has co-opted this nutrient acquisition ability. So as I talk a little bit more about symbiosis, I'm going to scroll through some examples of symbiosis, but not really talk about them. Okay, so if symbiosis is such a prevalent phenomenon in biology and in the natural world, why is it only now being discovered? If you look in textbooks, ecology textbooks, medical textbooks, what you will see is that discussions of interactions between organisms and even discussions of evolution feature things like competition, predation, and disease, all negative interactions. Well, as it turns out, symbiosis is a prominent feature of life on Earth, and it was discovered in large part because the ability to begin sequencing DNA illustrated that when you sequence the genome or the entire DNA of an organism, you get not only that organism, but all the other organisms living in and on it. So for example, when the fruit fly genome was sequenced, they got not just the fruit fly genome back, but also a collection of bacteria that turn out to have very important symbiotic relationships with Drosophila. So it is technology that has driven some new discoveries in biology and allowed features like symbiosis that used to be thought of as being kind of like anomalous phenomena to actually be central to biology. So as I've scrolled through all of these slides without talking about them, you've seen a variety of different kinds of organisms that have symbioses. And in fact, almost, if not every organism on the face of the planet works in symbiosis with some others, providing features that then natural selection can act on. Okay, so some final thoughts. As this book illustrates, and as biology illustrates, nothing in biology or in life is simple. Many of our deeply held beliefs are oversimplified. For example, our idea that parasites are harmful turns out to be an incomplete truth. Also, reading this book made me uncomfortable. Thinking about deliberately infecting myself with hookworms was a very uncomfortable idea. But that uncomfortable idea signals an opportunity for me to set aside some of my deeply held beliefs and to think about them in a different and more complex context. And in fact, that is what we hope for all of us here at Vassar College, is that we, instead of avoiding uncomfortable ideas, we embrace them, and we use those uncomfortable ideas to challenge our own beliefs and to seek new information. So that's my final thought, is Vassar has our mantra, go to the source, and I urge you and me and all of us to do that. Seek information, collect information, think about it, and collect that information by going to the source. I've shown you Darwin's phylogenetic tree today. That is one example of going to the source. I hope your first weeks here at Vassar College are good ones. I look forward to meeting some, or hopefully many of you. This fall I'm teaching a class called Life in the Sea. It's an intro bio course. And I'm also actually teaching a senior seminar on symbiosis. So if you think symbiosis is a cool idea and you want to learn more about it, I hope to see you in one of my classes. All right, good luck.